Hello, how's everybody doing today? Hi, Oakley.
Hi, Omar. Hi, everybody.
It's great to see familiar faces. Teresa, we haven't seen you in a while. Welcome back. And some new faces and names. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this week. How cool was that new title card? Space for Breakthrough. That was brand new. Thank you.
We did it
Very
for
awesome.
you. Looks rad.
We're upping our game every week. So each time you show up, we're like, okay, we're just gonna continue to really improve in creating the experience. And so we're excited. This is October 1st. And for those that track these things, it's a full moon. That's probably the first time in my life I've ever included that in a sentence. But now I'm starting to pay attention to these things, natural cycles beyond sort of, the things that happen in our calendars. And so before we get started with the interview of Oakley, which is going to be the main focus of today, I'd like us to do our check-in for the week. And today's check-in is, if you look back on just the last 7 days and it was a book title, what would it be? And feel free to either access your mic, because we don't unmute here. We access our mics here, or share it in the chat. So book title of your life over the last week. I don't know if Oakley, you have one.
Yeah, book title would be The Reconfiguration of Oakley.
Nice. Others, anybody else have one? And or feel free also to share in the chat. Trisha?
Yeah, the amazing and unpredictable story, her story, telling her story, not his story.
Love it.
Love that.
Making her story.
I love it. It's an evolving book title, even better. I think mine this week would be Surfing Dharma Bum. So I've gotten 4 days of surfing in this week. So I am very grateful for a little beach time when it's been so hot here in LA in particular. Any other book titles for folks?
Anything goes.
Anything goes.
Workshop it.
Sweating in Pasadena. Thank you, Brian.
That's great, Brian.
That's very real. All right. And then just the homework for this last week was watching Kiss the Ground. Did anybody get a chance to watch the Netflix premiere of Kiss the Ground and Regenerative Soil? Oakley?
Ever the student.
Awesome. And what was your any sort of reactions?
Oh, it's so hopeful. If you need a little dose of hope, watch Kiss the Ground, you guys. It's it just reminds us that we have the answers, and that through changing our belief structure and the way we view things and deepening our understanding of the natural world, like, we can actually begin to heal the world. So it's brilliant. It's beautiful.
That's awesome. And that's absolutely was the intention of the film. And Rylan Engelhart, who is the executive director and co-founder of Kiss the Ground, his, I think, Instagram bio is like eternal optimist. I mean, this is a guy who just exudes love. His parents' farm is called Be Love Farm. And one of my friends watched the movie with her daughter earlier this week and was texting me yesterday that her daughter now wants to do a composting project for her science class. And she's going to sign up to become a regenerative soil advocate and go through a training program. So it's just been, in my, little bubble, seeing folks really get excited that we have agency, we have choice. And no matter sort of tumultuous, you know, Trisha, her story and the making of her story, that's about choice. The name of the movie, Linda, is Kiss the Ground, and you can now watch it on Netflix.
And Omar, I have
and it's
to
really all about regenerative soil.
Yeah, I have to add too, because the regenerative soil piece is all about getting like thousands and millions and billions of microorganisms back into our soil. And as someone who's spent so many decades in the personal development field, which also included health and wellness, my own personal journey that we'll talk about around like a million different health things that really comes down to gut health, I was so blown away by the parallel, yet again, of the physical system as a microcosmic example of the macro. You know, it's like we put more little buggies in the soil that help decompose things and bring life and bring nutrients. And it's the same as someone who was on antibiotics for way too long when I was healing from Lyme disease and just stripped my gut, right? Just stripped it and didn't even know how to digest food for like a year after that. And so I'm watching this soil regenerate and I'm like seeing the healing of all these people who are dealing with gut issues, digestive health, which 100% has to do then with mental wellness, mental health and wellness, because the gut and the brain are so intertwined. So I just got very excited about the interconnection of the film with not only the health of the earth, but the health of the earth determining also the health of humanity, you know, and that was really cool.
I think people are now calling the gut the second brain.
Yeah.
And that there are the same number of neurons in your gut as a dog has in its brain. Right?
Yeah.
And so you think about like sort of the intuition and sort of the instinct and then, you know, just knowing of things. It's real and it's powerful and it's, if not 100%, it's 99% driven by what we eat. You know, when we talk about we are what we eat, it's a very real thing. And then what we eat, really where it comes from matters. And so this is a great sort of segue into where are we coming from? And so today, folks, I'm getting to interview Oakley. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One is that we just sort of jumped into this Zoomcast and started creating the space, but we hadn't really actually taken that time to kind of share a little bit about who we are, what our inspirations were for kind of creating this space. But also, really also to create the space for you each to think about your stories, because the stories that we tell ourselves really shape our own mental health and our perspective. And each day, what is that point of view that we're going to take, right? And if we know where our food comes from, then we're going to more likely know if we're going to be healthier. And so if we know where our stories are coming from, then we're more likely to be able to approach things from a more positive mental health point of view. And so I get a lot of prerogative as the interviewer today. And so I want to start with a poem. And it's called You Reading This, Be Ready by William Stafford, who's one of my favorite poets. Okay, so everybody just take a nice breath in and out. Starting here, what do you want to remember? How sunlight creeps along a shining floor? What scent of old wood hovers? What softened sound from outside fills the air? Will you ever bring a better gift for the world than the breathing respect that you carry wherever you go right now? Are you waiting for time to show you some better thoughts? When you turn around, starting here, lift this new glimpse that you found. Carry into evening all that you want from this day, this interval you spent reading or hearing this. Keep it for life. What can anyone give you greater than now? Starting here, right in this room, when you turn around. one of the reasons I love this poem for starting today is that it's mostly questions. And it's the questions that we ask ourselves that really drive our story. And so my first question for you, Oakley, and just so that everybody knows, I didn't give Oakley my questions in advance. So I wanted everybody to get the spontaneous experience at once. So yes, you know, we know from the title, psychotherapist, trained philosopher, you've mentioned your work in meditation community. You've got all these great skills. But before all that, this is the Oakley that I'd like to know better. What is your first memory in life?
Wow, my very first memory in life, for real?
Yes, yep.
I was told this was a little unusual. I remember all the way back to when I was 2 years old, maybe younger. And I was in those little feetsy pajamas. Remember those from the 80s, you
Love
guys?
those.
Little zip up, right? And I remember holding onto the side of my crib, and it was like this plastic like feeling. And I remember looking through this room that I was in as a child. And I remember just sitting there, like standing. I was standing holding on. And I must have been maybe not 2, because I don't remember that I could talk yet. And I remember studying everything. I remember looking at the way that the light from the hallway was coming in, and I can remember this goose. Do you guys remember those from the 80s? You plug in this glowy goose and the goose lights up. It was like, you can find it all over eBay now. I mean, I don't know where this stuff came from. And that little goose was there, and there were these little like puffballs on a bedspread of this little twin bed that was in the corner of the room, probably where, you know, my mom would fall asleep with me and stuff. And then I remember just how quiet it was. Like I just was standing there by myself in the middle of the night in my little feetsy pajamas, just taking it all in. I don't remember wanting anything. I don't remember waiting for somebody. I was just examining the world. And
That's
is
beautiful.
my very first memory.
And that was 2 years old, you said?
I mean, maybe a little pre-verbal. So
Wow, that's amazing.
maybe I got dad and mom in there. Because I remember I couldn't call out for anybody because I didn't have language yet.
I love that that is your early memory as an observer. And that is such an important sort of place to begin. All right, similar vein, what's your first spiritual memory?
Oh man, such a good question. I'm like, how do I want to, which one do I pull from? Because
the first one.
Okay, the first one. Well, there's one about, there was one that I would define as spiritual. And then there's one that I would define as other dimensional, right? So I have a memory of seeing a ghost when I was about 4. Yep.
I was not expecting this one. All right.
I know. And then I have a memory of meditating when I was 7.
Whoa.
So what do we do?
Let's go both. You have me intrigued.
Okay. So this is the same house I grew up in as a little girl. We moved shortly after this, once my brother was, I don't know, a little older. And so apparently there was a thunderstorm. My dad tells me that. I don't remember that. But it explains it because I was sleeping between my mom and my dad in their queen bed or whatever it was, right? And I remember I was sleeping on my side. My dad was on my right. My mom was on the left. And if you sort of picked your head up and looked to the left, there was their doorway to the hallway. And there were these stairs that went sort of traced the wall down to the first floor, right? And there was a little, like, not a chandelier. That sounds like really fancy. Like a
Sounds very ghost oriented
it's
too.
like a light pendant, you know, whatever you want to call it. It's a little chandelier thing. And it was the only light on in the room, in the hallway area with the staircase. And I woke up. And I don't know why I woke up. It was just one of those little kid moments. I was sort of rolling over, and I guess I was having another like evening observation moment. And I remember looking out. It was like I was sort of like called to look out to the hallway, and I saw a shadow of a human being slowly walking up the stairs. I mean, so slow. And it was the perfect silhouette of a man. Now, I'm 4. I know that because my brother was just born. He was 1. And I had no idea that we had a word called ghost. Okay, because I didn't have that. This is how I knew, how I remember it so well. I remember my brain examining this shadow figure. I didn't even have a word for shadow, right? Like I don't remember any of that. I wasn't like, that's a shadow, right? I knew it was being cast by an object, and I couldn't find the object. And so I was like, I was staring at the person and then looking for the person. And I couldn't find the person that was casting this shape on the wall. And I was like super confused. I like really wanted to solve it. So I woke my dad up and I was like, come on, we got to figure this out. And my dad like looks up, he looks out. I remember that. And then he just lays down and he just goes, go to sleep, sweetie, go to sleep. It's nothing.
That's a very dad move right there.
That was a dad move. Dad was like, we are not doing this. Like, heck no. And that was my first experience of seeing that stuff. So that was that. Yeah.
And then what was the second memory?
And then the second memory was we had moved houses, and we moved when I was 7. So it was somewhere between 7 and 9. And I was really young still. I think my baby sister had just been born. There's 3 of us. And we moved, we were sort of out in the country in this other house outside of New York City in Connecticut. Lots of land, you know, like endless woods, we call it on the East Coast, right? Woods. And we moved to my great grandmother's house, who I was named after, Sarah Oakley. And it was a really special moment for my mom because this was her side of the family, and she had grown up going to this house during after World War II and stuff like that. And it was really special. And she said to herself, one day I'm going to buy that house back into the family. So my dad and her had bought it back in. So this beautiful old stone house, and it just had like woods forever, you know, and I was in heaven. And so I would be gone all day. Hence the Lyme disease that is part of the story later. But ticks were a normal part of my life. So I was always in the forest, always in the woods, running around like a little banshee. And there is a really special spot by this pond through the woods. And my first experience of spiritual state was, guys, I don't know. We can call it past life. I don't know. I don't know how this stuff comes to be yet as a psychotherapist, honestly. But I was inspired to sit down by the edge of the pond and cross my little legs. So I was in, cross-legged position. And I was inspired to put my little hands on my knees. And I was facing the sun, and the sun was up in the sky. And I closed my eyes, and with all my might, I was trying to pull the light from the sun into my third eye. And so I was pulling it. And I remember this whole feeling of like all this warmth and this light sort of taking over my body. And I just sort of like stayed there. I would call it now sort of like a moment of disillusion. And then I was like, oh, that felt good. And I ran off into the woods. like a while
Your
later.
7-year-old experience was very different than mine. I think mine tended to be, I was chasing a ball. There was a ball, I was chasing it.
A lot of that too, but you asked specifically about spiritual.
So, I mean, this is amazing. Like, I did not anticipate ghosts and third eye at age 7.
I can only
As
describe
part
it
of
now
this.
with the language, right? Like I didn't know
Right.
it was third eye. I said
Um,
forehead back in the.
So, yet you were also a psychotherapist.
Yeah.
But before we jump there, and I'd love to just get a snapshot of Oakley as a 20-something. So, because I have my partner kind of believes that the sort of energy that we're sort of moving in the world in our 20s really has a long arc. And so give us a snapshot of Oakley as a 20-something.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so that's like a book. So I'll give you a snapshot of the book.
Snapshot,
Snapshot
keyword
of the book.
snapshot.
In my 20s, I would say that I was fairly fierce in my seeking. I was a really, I was a seeker, and I would like not be stopped sort of thing. So I was incredibly independent in my 20s, maybe too much so. Like I over rotated and was so, and so I somehow would convince my parents to like get behind me on these like crazy happenings, things that like no one on this Zoom call would be like, that's a good idea for a 22-year-old. Like, you know, but my parents were like, okay. And they were good parents. They were, well, that makes sense. I mean, you're okay. You're answering all our questions, you know, like that. So I think a snapshot could be kind of, I guess 20s is after I graduated from college, but I still had that energy in my teens where I would convince my parents to let me go on these crazy adventures. And my 20s, I would say my 20s, the education, the spiritual education that I had been seeking on a soul level from a young child, which I was conscious of as a teenager. Around the age of 14, I started sort of getting mad at whatever we want to call it. I actually didn't really have a specific name. I wasn't like mad at God, but I was like sort of just mad at the universe for not sending me a teacher like yet. And I was like, I have a lot to learn. We got to get down to it. I was very like, okay, people, let's go, you know, like that. And so in my 20s, when I was in college, the snapshot is through different mentorship. It really took a village to raise me. I had a lot of different mentors. My mom was super grateful for that. So was my dad. And
where were you? You were in New York at this point?
I was in New York. Yeah, I was in New York. Yep.
And what were you like? Did you have like a day job? What was your sort of like day to day?
Well, I was at Sarah Lawrence College, and I started studying with a mentor who introduced me to a spiritual guru named Sai Ma. And I snuck off, like my parents didn't even know I went, and went to one of her conferences somehow, you know, saving money and working during the summers. And I did crazy jobs. You know, I was worked at the grocery store in the summer, and we were on the shore in Connecticut, so I taught windsurfing. I mean, I did a million different things. It was all like, nothing was like glamorous. It was just like 20-something grit work, you know? But I guess yeah. I mean, I also like was self-directed and wanted to work at this place called City Kids. That was a after school safe place. So I marched myself into New York and got a job there. You know, it was crazy. So I ended up, my 20s, I ended up studying with Sai Ma, and I ended up becoming a teacher for her, is the real snapshot, because that really is what colored all of my 20s. Around 22, I met her again and kind of enrolled myself in study and traveled all over the world with her and taught on her behalf. You know, I was a very young, vivacious young teacher, and taught, yeah, in all over the country and all over the world, and was so hungry. I was hungry in my 20s. Like that was like, I just wanted to learn.
And tell me the sort of the transition between that seeking and then Lyme disease, which you've talked about a couple of times, and then actually kind of in some ways, I would say a pivot with becoming a psychotherapist. I feel like that's like a very sort of, some of the language seeking has a very specific sort of direction. And then you're like, that feels like a right turn. So what was the sequence and timing of those things? And are they related?
Yeah, good question. So in my 20s, I began studying with this spiritual teacher, and I'm just kind of mapping it out in my head. So I graduated college, started teaching with her, and what had always been a thread through it all was mentoring young adults. So like even in high school, I was mentoring these young people. Now I also have to paint the picture. Like I was a really good student. I was a competitive athlete, but I was also like a wild child, like bat out of hell nuts, right? Like partied really hard and like all of that. So I played hard, worked hard. So there wasn't like this sort of like ironed out, like I'm a mentor. Like that didn't, it was sort of like the adults in my life saw this leadership capacity and saw that I needed to train it. And so I got these opportunities to continue to like work with young adults. And through that, I began to train my capacity as a mentor and a leader. So that was in tandem with the spiritual teaching. So when I was with this teacher for her community, I built, I co-authored a camp for young adults. And I ran it every summer with this team and came up with the curriculum with my friend. And we trained everybody up and we ran this thing. And there was this question, you know, throughout the study is like, how am I going to best express myself in a career? You know, like I could have gone down the road of advertising. I could have gone down the road of design. Like there's a lot of different stuff that I was interested in. I'm an artist by trade also, but there were like things. So I just started putting the little, you know, beads together, like stringing them together and saying, what have I always done that I was willing to do for free? Right?
That's a
and
great question to ask yourself.
That's it, right? So when you're thinking about your purpose, what have I done for free and what would I do for free? So I looked at that and it was just so obvious. I would spend hours with these young adults and I was like, huh. And then I ended up working at a charter school for gang youth. And I found that I was like most lit up when I was sitting in the hallway working with them around their behavior. Like, why did they act out? What was going on at home versus teaching them math? And I was like, oh shit, this is information, right? Like, I don't care if they know the formula for buoyancy. Like, oh, I have to admit that. Like, I'm probably not going to teach science. Like, that's bad. So then I started looking at like where I was willing to show up just because, you know, and then it all started making sense. So I applied to graduate school in my late 20s, while continuing to study. Now, then I went into my 30s, I graduated, I opened a private practice right away. I had all these kids I was mentoring, so the practice sort of filled up. And I was still teaching nationally and all this kind of stuff. And I have to be honest, y'all, it was sort of this moment where I was like, I think I'm nailing this. Like, life, check, I got you. And life was like, oh, honey, we are not done with you. And so I went into this complete sort of unraveling, like disintegration, ego annihilation fire, right? It was like everything I knew and loved and had built just started falling apart.
Was there a catalyst or?
Yeah, it was honestly, it was the car accident in 2014. That was the main catalyst. And I had been sort of leading up to that with recognizing that I wasn't feeling that well.
So 6 years ago, car accident, and that sort of is life. So take us a little bit to that moment. So
yeah,
or
So I think I sort of thought that I was like doing really great. And there were, as in, you know, I love this part of like, I got this from a Landmark training, if you guys know Landmark, the organization. And I went to their forum as part of training when I was younger, to learn around distinctions and all this kind of stuff. So it was a good education on that level. And I didn't know what I didn't know. That's what Landmark says, right? So I knew what I knew. I knew what I didn't know. But there was a whole part of the world, my personality, that I just didn't even know about. And my 30s was about unpacking that, right? My 30s was about coming into a wholeness that will continue right throughout my life, right? I'm in 40 now, but it was a real trial of will and unfolding. So I was leading a group of women in Trinidad, Tobago, in personal development work in my early 30s. They're beautiful, it's an incredible group of women. I'm still close with them. I love them. They're extraordinary. And I was going down for my second workshop, and I got a phone call from my spiritual teacher, from her assistant, right? And this was a friend of mine, right? So I'm talking to her, and she's like, "Hey, so I'm calling on behalf of Simon. She just has a question for you. She knows you're going down to Trinidad in a minute, and she's just asking you, is it in integrity for you to go teach this workshop on living vibrantly?" And I said to myself, I was like, I mean, I thought it was. Thank you. I'll take a look, right? And we hung up the phone. So I sat there in my friend's apartment in New York. I was slated to leave in 5 days from that time. And I remember closing my eyes, and I just sort of dropped in to my heart. And I just let myself look what was there. And I remember seeing how scared I was to lead this workshop, because underneath it all, I was so exhausted. I was afraid that I wasn't going to be able to get out of bed.
So this was before or after the accident?
Before the accident.
Okay.
Right? So just these little micro moments. And this is all about like listening. Like the universe like gently taps, then it knocks, then it hits you with the 2x4. And I was a tough nut to crack, so I got no shame about that. Like I had to get hit by the 2x4. So lesson for all of us, you guys, right? Like if the universe tapping, like please take a minute to listen. So I thought to myself, like, wow, that's not in integrity. You know, like, oh no, I'm in trouble. Right? I mean, they had paid a lot of money. These were dignitaries of the country, like the wives of dignitary. I mean, there was a lot on the line. And I called the head lady there, who's a dear friend, and I said, "This is what's up." And she said, "Well, it sounds like you have some stuff to tend to. And, you know, and we support you in figuring out what's going on with your health, and we're going to miss you. And we get it." I'm not making.
What was that like saying no? Because that sounds like a very specific,
It was
one of the hard things to do for somebody who seems as gung-ho as you are.
It was
is to say no.
one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do. Like I'm even flushed now. Like there's like heat in my body from talking about like that moment in my life where I had to call and admit that I couldn't do it. Like I couldn't do it. That was it. I had to say it. I was like, I can't do this. I can't carry the whole weekend. I feel like shit. Right? And so it was so intense. And then I subsequently like started to, you know, look at everything. Now, you're right, Omar. Was that before the car accident? Because that wouldn't.
You tell me.
That's where I always get so confused, because it's such a crazy year. It was such an insane year where everything blew up. So I had to let go of the groups, and then I had to think about my private practice. And I was running this program in Denver for young adults also, because I had built this thing in New York and then got called out to Denver to recreate the program. And I had 2 weeks left in my contract. This is what happened. I had 2 weeks left in my contract. And I remember like the will that I was pushing with, right? And I was driving up into the mountains to go see a friend for dinner. The bridges had frozen, the roads weren't frozen yet, and I hit black ice, and I spun and hit the wall going, 55, 60 miles an hour. The car was totaled. I climbed out. I had so much adrenaline going through me, I didn't know what way was up. I had no idea what was going on. Everybody came, ambulance, fire trucks, police. It was like one of those wrecks. And being like the strong-willed buck that I was at the time, the ambulance was like, hey, we're going to take you to the hospital, but you have the right to refuse. And I was like, I'm fine. And I didn't get in the ambulance. And it turned out that I had obviously an incredibly serious concussion that took me 3 months to heal from. And I ended up landing at these doctors that then diagnosed me with chronic Lyme disease. So that was at 33.
So you'd just been pushing through. Tell us a little bit more about what does chronic Lyme disease do to you?
Muscling. So chronic Lyme creates a systemic inflammation response in the body that makes it nearly impossible to function as a regular human being. Neurologically, I had seen signs of it even in graduate school. I remember starting to take a pen, and I would sketch things just to blow off some steam, because I had that artist background in graduate school for psychotherapy. So I'd be sketching, and I remember I would send the message to my hand to move the pen, and it would not go. And so there was a real neurological functioning, and eventually I didn't have word recall. I couldn't tell you any of my history. I couldn't, if you and I talked like this and I turned around and then came back, I wouldn't remember what we talked about. So
And you made it through grad school with this.
Yeah. 4.0.
That's some persevering, of course. Humble brag. Thank you.
I mean, but that's an important part, because it's a humble brag, but it's also like the level of will that we're functioning from at this point, right? Like I had to get related to that. I had to be like, holy cow, like cut yourself a break, Oaks, like that. But I didn't even know. I didn't know what I didn't know. So this not knowing started rising up to show me that I had reached the maximum capacity of my life if I was going to create it by myself and solely from will. That's it. This is what it looked like. We weren't going any further. And I had such a desire to take my life further that I was, honestly, I say this, I really mean this. And this is where we are talking about reframe in this series, right? Is I was blessed enough to experience an accident that was the best of a worst case scenario. I could have died easily. I could be dead easily. But I walked away from that accident with a concussion and a scratched nose, right? The best of a worst case scenario that woke me up to what it actually would take to build the life of my dreams.
What's fascinating too is this is coming from someone who had a ton of intention around spirituality and sort of wellness, and to still then be blinded. I mean, I think part of the challenge of these stories are, what are those blind spots that we have? I want to sort of transition Oh, go
Can I
ahead.
say something quick to that? Because it's so important.
Please.
One of the teachings for me. You know, there's a point in our development, our evolution, that I think a lot of us experience this, where we do it in isolation. If our family doesn't get it or our friends don't get it, we kind of do this thing privately, right? Or then we find a crew that we can do it with, right? And maybe our family's cool, maybe not. That's part of some people's story. But there's a moment in time in our spiritual development where community is everything. And it's actually the reflection from the people that we love and that we trust, who have capacity in the way that we respect to give us feedback about where they see us, that we have to be humble enough to let that ego burn in the fire of transformation and take that feedback and listen and integrate it. And that's the bridge that I see a lot of people stop at. They say, you know what, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. I'm going to stay here. I figured it out and I'm good. Right? And that's an okay place to stay. It's just that a lot of people get stuck there. And I had arrived there at an early age, right? In my late 20s, and was so fortunate to have a spiritual community who loved me enough, who was around me to say, this is what we see, this is how I've experienced you, and this is what we see as possible. And we're telling you this because we believe in you. And I had to just like take it, you know, and then transform in that love. If that makes sense.
So I love also talking about your community and your friends. So if you think about your three kind of best friends, what qualities in them do you appreciate for you?
Oh, it's beautiful. If I think about my three, they have an incredibly developed sense of awareness of themselves. And that's fine, but it's coupled with a willingness to own their contribution to the relationship, positive or negatively. And so they have a high level of self-awareness, and they have a profoundly deep willingness to own up. And that creates this incredibly deep connection and this really deep trust.
So a couple more questions, and I also
And
want to
they're
just
funny as hell.
There we go. And there we go. And what folks may not know too is that Oakley used to be an improv, and so these creative spaces are a joy for her. If you have questions, feel free to jot them into the chat, and I'm going to ask a couple more, but open it up as well. If you were an ocean vessel, what would you be?
Ooh. I would be this very sleek wooden two-masted racing sailboat.
What would that symbolize?
I mean, the way they cut through the water, it's just so elegant, but it's so organic. It's like there's these boats that I have in my mind that I've seen in Maine and off the coast of Connecticut are so beautiful. They're not too big and intense. Only a little crew can fit on them, maybe 4 to 6, maybe. And the way that they relate to the elements while they're sort of cutting through the ocean is so well, it's related, you know. There's no like the boat and then the ocean. It's like this beautiful harmony, like the boat was always meant to be a part of that experience on the ocean, you know.
And just a couple of these are just fun, like favorite movie, favorite book. And I once was giving a talk to some younger folks, and they're like, what about favorite video game? I was like, that never occurred to me to ask. So if you have a favorite video game, please share as well.
Oh my God, Omar, please don't date me. I do not. Or I'll say like, remember Super Mario Kart?
There we go.
Yeah. Rainbow level princess. Okay. I love historical fiction. I could give you guys all these spiritual help development books. I've got those for days, but historical fiction is one of my favorite types of writing. And there is a book called Raj,
Mm.
by a female writer out of India, um,
RAJ.
RAJ. Yep, it means king.
Mm.
And it's the story of the colonialization of India through the lens of Gandhi fighting for Indian rights. And it's this princess losing her power, having to find her way through this colonialization. And it gives you all these like real historical moments in time through this sort of like fantastical lens. And it's just a beautiful read. It's a beautiful
Favorite
read.
movie?
In my teenage years, Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Perfect. We'll stop there.
Okay.
And my last question, and please, folks, if others have questions, do you have any daily practices to help you now that you sort of see your blind spots, and how have they evolved over time?
I do. I meditate almost every day. I would
How
say
long?
20 minutes minimum. And if that's really hard, I'll at least sit for 10. And my meditation practice changes monthly. I go through different stages, and it's 100% about what I'm going through and what my intention is. So it's evolved a lot. It's gone from picturing like colors filling my energy field to deep chakra work to guided neurological practices where I'm just like practicing brain stuff to creating a vision in my life and aligning my thoughts and my feelings. So all these different domains over the years. But I'll tell you that I allow it to evolve. That's important to know. And I'm flexible with what arises for myself. So I have the discipline of sitting almost every day, and I developed that through creating a goal that I could succeed at. So I can sit now for an hour plus without any trouble. That's a joy for me, actually. I could not say that when I was in my 20s, right? I love sitting, I love expansion and silence and light, but the discipline of sitting, right, was a totally different thing. And so I developed that over time, and my back would burn and my hips would hurt and my knees would hurt and all that stuff. And I don't think you need to go through that pain experience that's sort of outdated. However, I set goals for myself. So my senior year of college, I had a journal, and it was like a day-to-day calendar, you know? And I sat for 5 minutes every single day. I didn't miss a day. And I would sit and I would do this sort of color meditation because I needed something like entertaining for the mind. And so I would, go through each color, and they all had qualities, and I was studying sort of the qualities of these colors. Blue was like will, and pink was love, and white was purity. So I was working with these qualities through color, I could say. And I would fill my body with them and fill my space around, and I would sit for 5 minutes. And that was my practice. And that was so invaluable because I really developed discipline through that. So I would say if you're creating a practice for yourself, know yourself and try to create something that you can actually succeed at. Like if that sounds crazy to you, 5 minutes every day, then do 5 minutes on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Like really this journey of awakening, I'll call it, to who we really are, like past the personality and the inherited beliefs from family and stuff like that, is all about learning about us, right? And creating wins. Like
Love that.
Don't prescribe to outside of yourself. And if someone's like 20 minutes every day, now 20 minutes is the prescribed amount of time that it takes to change a neurological pattern for 6 weeks to 12 weeks. But if you're not into that, if that sounds like an epic lift to you, then set yourself up for a win, because you building confidence on your particular flavor of path of awakening is all that matters.
I love it. All right, you're still getting interviewed. I love that you slipped into teacher mode real quick. Last question, and again, if folks would like to chime in here, what's a future memory you want for yourself right now?
Oh, that's so nice. A future memory I want for myself right now, Omar?
Yes.
You know I love the future memories.
I know you do.
I do. I think a future memory I want for myself is a memory of being with community in a way that supports their awakening. I want that. That's a future memory. It's a big one, but that's real for me.
Well, thank you so much, Oakley, for your candor, your enthusiasm. I definitely did not anticipate ghosts at the beginning of this conversation.
I didn't either.
I've probably had 3 conversations about ghosts in my life, and this is now one of them. But I think that's also, part of what's beautiful is to really sort of see the different threads. And I love that even as a 2-year-old, your observer mind was there, and that you listened to it, and that you trusted that experience. And it's just amazing to see how that has kind of just continued, and now that you're sharing it.
Omar, can I have one teacher moment on that?
Please. And if anybody else, last chance, otherwise Oakley's, gonna take us home here.
It's just like there's the story, and then there's the how the story changed. And I just want to say that when I was in graduate school, I was aware of that memory, and I was aware of the very challenging relationship I had with my mom. And the original sentiment of that memory was that I was alone. And I did enough work through the years where that memory reframed itself, where I wholeheartedly know that I was just standing there awake, looking at the room. But because of a pain that I felt in my relationship as a teenager, I put that on the memory, right? And so I just want to say that I'm having my teacher moment. Thank you guys, because we can always reframe our memories. Always. There is always a new perspective that if something is causing you pain, you haven't seen yet. Because I have so many stories that are about pain, right? But through conscious choice, I have found the gold in them that has empowered me today. Right? That is a conscious choice. I mean, real stories, like, promise. And there's just such a richness in my mind about my life, in my heart about my life, because of the conscious choice to stare that memory in the face and say, what did I miss here? What have I not seen yet? Because we are in that universal love, and there is always something for our growth waiting. So if it's causing pain, I just invite you to know that there is a treasure in it for you.
Denise is going to close us out with one question here. What did those trusted people in your community tell you they saw in you that you then embraced and evolved into?
Oh, thank you. They told me that I had been a personal assistant for Saima on top of all of that stuff. I'm a spiritual teacher at some point in that era. And they told me that they had seen me become arrogant. Straight up. Yep. And when you hear that from your teaching team, that one burns hard. Also because on the spiritual path, God forbid you're ever arrogant, right? So spiritual arrogance also is such a sneaky form of arrogance because we can justify the shit out of it. So be careful of spiritual arrogance, right? So they told me they had seen me be arrogant and that they were feeling less connected. Yep. And I will never forget that night that they told me that. And I'm forever grateful. Like those people now are my biggest cheerleaders. Right? So they were like, we see this because we love you. We've seen what's possible. We know you for 10 years, you know. So it was a belief in the essence of me and not a buy-in or a judgment of the personality that had developed protective mechanisms to keep myself safe. Right? And so I had to trust that I was safe enough to start to let that arrogance, those guards down and let them sort of begin to dissolve.
Well, I think that's a beautiful note. As I think about this week's homework, I'd love to invite folks to really think about one memory that they can reframe for themselves. It could be maybe some words that were spoken to you that need to be reframed and addressed, or a moment that didn't go the way that you expected, or just like Oakley shared, where it's just sort of you were called out in a particular way. What was the treasure in that? Mm-hmm. Anything else, Oakley? This was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. This was such sweet questions. You're such a good interviewer. Thank you for just creating space and doing this. This is so beautiful. And thank you, all of you. I just feel so connected. I haven't shared my story like this in this format, so just know you're the first to hear it like this. So thank you for just holding me in your hearts and all of that. It was just really, really special. So thank you.
I think that's this week, and this month is again really about reimagining our stories. We've all been on a journey, and we are all on a journey, and reimagining our lives is really, in some ways, the gift that we're given. And what are then the exercises that we can give ourselves to really be open to that unfolding? We started in some ways the conversation around food. What are you feeding yourself? And these daily practices in some ways are the food that we feed ourselves to help us really be open to this journey in new ways. I don't want to say goodbye. This is so awesome.
So nice.
But I do want to thank you. And I also just quick shout out, Jennifer Rosenthal and Brian Vasquez. We've asked them to turn on their videos. Now they're with us every week. They help us produce the show. Jennifer helps us produce the show. Brian handles all the audio and technology. This is why Oakley and I have fancy mics. And we're going to continue to evolve this. So please reach out to us, email, Instagram, YouTube. We want to hear from you. And we are co-creating this space, and we felt like this part of the conversation was an important one. Thank you.
And remember, y'all, like, if you feel stuck in your journey, leveraging your community, you can ask. You don't have to wait like I had to, where it was like an intervention, right? Like, you can find your people and say, hey, I felt a little stuck, you know, like, can you tell me how I've been showing up for you? Can you just give me an honest response? You know, like that's a brave thing to do. And then it'll start to have you confront like who's actually in your life and what kind of people are around you and all that kind of stuff. So,
And for the record, we're your people.
yeah, we're here. Totally. So, anyway.
Thanks, everybody. We look forward to seeing you next week and continuing this conversation. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.